Hey everyone, just wanted to let you know that if you have little ones around that do not know about the birds and the bees yet, maybe listen to this episode with some headphones on because we're talking about Song of Songs. Wanted to give you that heads up. Let's dive in.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. My name is Seth, and today, David
What's up?
is going to be taking us through the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon.
Yes.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling trepidatious and joyful, which maybe kind of just feels like how the woman felt in this song, maybe.
So it has been years. So normally on this podcast, I come in very well prepared, and you
Yes.
come in very ignorant.
Yeah.
Today,
Thank you.
today, however,
Very ignorant.
I put
Perhaps
on.
slightly less red than you'd been at the moment, but
I will
excruciatingly ignorant is also an option for me.
I will proudly wear a dunce hat today. I have not read Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon. So that's probably even my first question. Why does it have two names?
Sure.
But I haven't read this in years. It's one of the few books of the Bible that I have not ever opened up a commentary on before.
yeah.
So I am very much ignorant
Yeah.
of what's going on here. So I'm just all ears.
Let me start with a question.
Yeah.
Why is this not a book you've frequented regularly? As someone who loves the Bible, preaches the Bible, studies the Bible, why is this one that doesn't darken your door regularly?
Well, by virtue of the job that I have, I generally get to read most books of the Bible and study them. And so Hosea is, that's a more famous one, but the weird minor prophets like Nahum and Obadiah, I've had a chance by virtue of my job to go into them. You actually wrote the Devos for this one.
Oh yeah.
And the Song of Solomon introduction we filmed was before I came on staff. So a part of my biblical study has always been just
wrapped up in whatever we're producing at Spoken Gospel.
right. And so these were artifacts before my time.
Maybe I'm trying to get at in your private devotion.
Ah.
And I'm guessing even before 2 or 3 years ago, whenever the last time you read it is, it's not a book you've spent a lot of time with.
No.
And I think I'm just trying to empathize with the audience here.
Yeah.
That's probably true for a lot of people. Why do you think this isn't a book you frequent in regularly, and why one that maybe a lot of people who are listening to this are unfamiliar with?
I think, if I was just to go off my guts, it's let's go for the big hitters. Songs, the Sermon on the Mount. Let's go for the Gospels. Let's go back to the Torah and read the Exodus story. And it just feels like this, and it's so short. And so even though I know this isn't true, there's probably a sense where I'm like, oh, if it's short, it probably doesn't have the import of some of the larger books, or doesn't have the significance. And it's I know that's not true,
Right,
but
right.
it's just something
There's
that
this small little book of poetry
Right.
in my Bible, and I kind of ignore it.
yeah. And when I do a Bible in the year plan, which I haven't done in a couple of years because I'm just reading more deeply
Yeah.
than straight through. It's it's a day.
It passes by real fast.
It passes by real fast.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so it's just not been a place I've paused often, or
Yeah.
even a Bible in the year plan tells me to pause.
Right. Yeah, I think for me, because I think it's one I just haven't spent a lot of time with either. And I think for me, I don't know how to approach this book.
Mm-hmm.
It either makes me blush.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm supposed to read this as a guide to my marriage or sexuality or things like that.
Yeah.
Or is this a picture of me and Jesus, which some people have argued, and I get very confused very quickly in a book like this.
That's fair. I've kind of got some assumptions in my head about Song of Songs, oh, it's a love song and it's kind of sexy,
Right.
and that's kind of all I know about it.
Yeah.
And so I'm oh, I don't know what to do with the breast tower, the few
images that you might know of.
Yeah, or I quote to myself and my wife occasionally,
and it's that's in my Bible.
Actually, I'm just remembering this now. I actually memorized part of Song of Songs.
Oh,
and recited it to Erica when I proposed to her.
Oh,
I totally forgot about
that's
this.
special.
It is special.
That's pretty cool.
So yeah, it's been a long time.
All right,
it's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with this.
Okay.
Let's get our heads in the right space, because the Song of Songs, which is what we're going to call it, we'll talk about why here in a little bit, but the Song of Songs is a love song.
Okay.
And we'll also talk about that in a little bit. But to maybe demystify the idea of a love song a little bit, let's just talk about how we have a lot of love songs in our culture and in all cultures. This is a very normal thing. And so I've looked up some of the top love songs of all time in our culture.
Okay.
And let's just look at some of the lyrics in them.
Okay.
So Bon Jovi's Always. This is one of the top songs of all time. Here's a quote. And I will love you, baby, always. And I'll be there forever and a day, always.
Always.
Okay. Marvin Gaye, Let's Get It On. Classic love song.
That's all you need to say.
There's nothing wrong with me loving you. Baby, no, and giving yourself to me can never be wrong. So look at just a few of those real quickly. There's these pledges of everlasting love that this lover will be there for his beloved always. So
like
is
deep monogamous almost.
Deep monogamous Bon Jovi song.
Yeah.
And then you've got this Marvin Gaye song, which is Let's Get It On, and it's more sexualized, and it's this giving yourself to me can never be wrong. And it's almost like the fact that this is so good or feels so good, this act of sexuality, it couldn't be bad. It feels so good. And so it's making morality claims about the act of sexual love. And as we hear these things, they train us about how to think about sex, how to think about relationships, how to think about marriage, how to think about the other sex. Like it trains our brains. This is what love songs do.
It tells us what to expect out of the relationships we find ourselves in.
Yeah. And I'm reminded of a little story here. I was speaking at an event, and a Bible translator, we were talking about poetry. And because poetry is like a huge part of her culture. And I had performed poetry that night. She came up to me and gave me a big hug. Yeah. And she was like, I'm so glad like America has a poet. And I was like, well, there's lots of us. I'm not the only one. But she was like, because I just don't hear poetry in America that much. Yeah. And she was like, and I just don't understand. Without poetry, how do you know how to feel anything?
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that's intense. Without poetry, how do we know how to feel? And so like love poetry, love songs teach us how to feel and think about this important union between man and woman. And how a lot of us have been trained is through this pop culture music or other love songs from our culture, and not from the greatest song ever written about a man and a woman being unified. And so
can I ask a question about that?
Ahead.
So the purpose of the Song of Songs, of Solomon's song, is to teach us how to feel and experience love?
I don't know. I don't know if we're ready to say that yet.
Yeah.
But I think it's safe to say that love poetry
does that.
And as a genre.
Is a love song.
And this is a love song. And so so it is a love song. One, and then I think the other thing that's helpful here is this is the Song of Songs. This is the greatest love song.
That's what that means.
That's what that means. So like Holy of Holies, it's the most holy place. King of Kings, it's the greatest king.
It's the song above all songs.
This is the song above all songs.
Okay.
And it's of Solomon's. So you could translate it Solomon's Song of Songs. So this could be the greatest song Solomon ever wrote.
Oh, that's the very first verse.
The very first verse.
The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's.
Right?
Yeah, okay.
But what most commentators think is that this is the greatest song, or maybe the greatest love song in the Solomonic tradition. So that not necessarily that this is written by King Solomon historically, but that it was written in his style or his vein or in his tradition, this wisdom tradition.
And is that distinction important to understanding what goes on in the song?
It is, mainly because of Solomon's storied past.
Okay.
Solomon was famously the wisest king. He prayed for wisdom, and God granted it to him so he might discern good from evil. And so we have that in our head when we think about Solomon. He knows good from evil. This should take us back to the Garden of Eden and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and what broke our relationship with God. And Solomon was this king who would know good and evil and bring us back into the garden. But he didn't, famously. And instead of having some monogamous wife, he had 700 concubines.
Yeah.
Instead of like blessing the nations, he made slaves and ended up looking more like Egypt than the kingdom of God, and really went backwards and became more sinful than holy.
Yeah.
And so he's not this wise king that he was supposed to be, nor is he this monogamous lover than he was supposed to be.
Or at least he fell from that ideal at some point.
He fell from that ideal at some point. Yes.
And so the argument would be like, oh, if we have here the ultimate song of love, it couldn't have been written by Solomon.
That's right, especially because, and there's argument about everything in this book. Let's just say that. But especially because the way Solomon is spoken of in this book is as a foil against the male lover in this book, that Solomon pays for his lovers, and Solomon like lets his lovers out like vineyards, and other people tend to them.
So Solomon, it's not the song of Solomon's love. It's Solomon's a character in the story, but he's not the man.
He's not. I don't believe he's the man.
Oh, fascinating.
In fact, he's compared to the man kind of negatively.
Fascinating.
And it's like, oh, Solomon has his hundreds of wives, but I only have one. Like, and it's there's this contrast between Solomon. So maybe this is who Solomon was supposed to be as a lover, but never was.
Yeah.
So that's why most scholars believe that Solomon was not the original audience.
Because that kind of self-critical attitude was not seen in Solomon's later years.
That's right. And you would almost need to have had his fall in order to be able to write him as a foil this way. And so anyway, so that's... But the reason why not only having Solomon in the background is helpful for the historicity, the story rounding out everything about like his life in comparison to this monogamous, beautiful life, it's also in the Solomonic tradition. So Solomon wrote wisdom literature, like the Book of Proverbs or other books in the Solomonic tradition, regardless of authorship, is like Ecclesiastes. And now you have Song of Songs, and they're kind of in conversation with each other. And so let's take Proverbs, for example. Proverbs speaks a lot about sexuality, how especially men should act towards women.
Yeah, it's like, isn't it? It's framed as like a father, Solomon, giving advice to his son on how to be a good man, to be a good husband, to seek wisdom, or like
And in Proverbs, you have that dilemma that every young man goes through of what am I going to do with my sexuality, kind of thrown between Lady Folly and Lady Wisdom in Proverbs.
That's right. Solomon like pictures the choice that every young man that his son would face as the choice between two different women.
That's right.
Like the faithful Lady Wisdom or like the seductress.
That's right. And both of the women come out into the street and call out to this man, this young man, and they allure him with wine and bread and the promise of love, but they're doing it two very different ways. And so not only is this a parable that Solomon is giving his son about, hey, make sure you choose the wise woman from Proverbs 31 and not the promiscuous, adulterous woman. It's also a picture, a metaphor, that is in Proverbs, of wisdom itself, that you would choose a wise life and not a life of folly, because a wise life leads to life, and a life full of folly leads to death. It's the Garden of Eden again. Like, know good and evil.
Okay.
And choose good and you'll have life. Choose folly and you'll have death.
So what I'm hearing is like it's a love song.
Now we're talking about Proverbs here. And Solomonic wisdom tradition.
Yeah, so I'm just like putting all this together.
Put it together.
What we're having is like, so when we get to the Song of Songs or the Song of Solomon, and those first words we see, which is Solomon's, it should just automatically connect us to everything else we know about Solomon. We know him as a wise man who like maybe ushered in one of the greatest eras of Israel's history, yet had a great fall, who was known for a type of love that he a type of love. And he's also known for a whole bunch of literature where he's adjuring his son to choose between two different women. And so when we just read that first line, we should be like, okay, what do we know about Solomon? And everything we know about the wisdom literature in Solomon's story should begin to populate our minds. And one of those things, too, is even the Garden of Eden. And I remember from my time in 1 Kings that whenever Solomon's reign takes place, he's described as like this new Adam figure, where he is this, he is the high point of Israel's.
That's right.
Israel's civilization in some ways, which makes his fall so.
That's right.
Horrifying.
And he builds the temple and fills it with all the old
God's
garden
presence
imagery.
Comes and like,
and you've got pomegranates and figs and all those kinds of things coming back. And
And to your point is like wisdom literature itself is not just about how best to live.
Although it is,
but it is also a way to think back to the very first story in the Bible as a choice between following God or doing what is right in our own eyes.
That's right. Because wisdom literature is the best way to live, because if we follow wisdom, we will end up back in the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. Like we will be a part of God's wise creation. And so it's interesting to think about this, where Solomon's literature is kind of in conversation with itself. And so if you think about how Proverbs and Ecclesiastes talk to each other, Proverbs comes across and it's just very clear cut. Yeah. If you do wise things, you will be blessed. If you obey God's commands, everything's going to work out for you. And we know by lived experience that often really faithful Christians suffer extreme things. And Proverbs doesn't deal with that.
Right.
Ecclesiastes does. Yeah. And it comes in and argues, in a sense, with Proverbs. And both are in the Solomonic tradition. And it's like, actually, I can do everything right, and everything goes to crap. And what Proverbs and Ecclesiastes do is they balance each other out. I think there's something similar happening with how Proverbs and Song of Songs talk to each other. Okay. With Proverbs, on the whole, there's a few exceptions, but on the whole, sexuality is something warned against. And be very careful, my son. Like, tread lightly, make good choices.
The seductress is the Lady
That's
Folly.
Right.
The one,
it's like, man,
the sexual one is foolishness.
I'm gonna be scared of sex now.
Yeah.
But then Song of Songs comes and kind of balances it out, and it's like, yes, my son, but look at the beauty of a wise marriage and a wise physical union. Let me show you how good it can be. And they're kind of in conversation with each other too, and I think they balance each other out. So that's why I think Solomonic literature is a helpful canon within a canon to think about.
Well, I asked earlier, it's like, well, is the point of this song to like teach us how to feel love? And you said, no, well, as much as it is a love song, it will teach us how to feel. And so what I'm hearing you say now is like, well, this is a song of wisdom. So is this a love song that teaches us to choose wisdom? And is that what the purpose of the song is? Or am I it's like, or are you just saying like, no, these are...
Yeah, I haven't made any conclusive statements
These are
yet.
the universes that we should be living in, thinking about what love songs do to us, think about what wisdom does to us.
Yes.
And so we've said the only definitive thing then is that this is a love song.
This is a love song in the wisdom tradition of Solomon.
Okay.
So what this song is going to do is show us what wise love between a man and a woman can look like. And I think that opens up another conversation for us to have. And that is kind of what you're getting at here, is how do we interpret or approach this book?
Yeah.
And maybe the question before that is, we still haven't quite lined out what is this book first. We've kind of addressed the first line.
Yeah.
You've got the greatest love song in the Solomonic wisdom tradition. Yeah. But then what follows is a series of interconnected poems.
Okay.
All speaking about basically the same event, which is the consummation of a wedding, a man and a woman coming together. And at different points in different poems, they might be at different stages of that consummation, but you might even argue that this is really just a number of poems looking at the same event from different perspectives.
And that event's like the honeymoon night.
The honeymoon night, the wedding night, when the man and woman, after being married, come together in union for the first time.
Okay.
And so you might be helpful to think about it that way, not as a linear story.
Okay.
As something that has point A, point B, point C, and it's over, but as describing one thing, the wise union of a man and a woman, and their wedding night. Now,
can I ask a question about that? Well, what is a wise wedding night mean?
Yes.
Those two categories don't really seem to talk to each other for me.
Yeah.
It's like, talk to me about what is a wise wedding night?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we'll get into it as we dig in, but on the surface, I think what we have to realize is a wise wedding night is one where you've got a man and a woman who have been betrothed to each other in a certain way. So you have this woman character. This is a good way to introduce the characters. So you have this beloved. Now she's the main speaker. which is rare in pretty much the whole Bible to have the main voice of an entire book of Scripture be that of a woman.
And back to the Solomonic wisdom tradition, that is one of the main voices of the book of Proverbs.
The voice of Lady Wisdom.
Is the voice
That's
of Lady
right.
Wisdom.
Yep.
Okay.
And so some have even argued for female authorship here.
Oh, fascinating.
Which is pretty fascinating. I think that case gets stronger as you get into the middle of it. But culturally, it's like, was it even possible? It doesn't super matter. But what matters is it sounds like a woman. How could a woman not have written this? And so you've got this woman, and she has protected her virginity extremely well. She's been a part of this community, the daughters of Jerusalem, who have all protected their virginity together, because virginity was highly, highly prized in this culture and a lot of cultures of this time. And it was kind of the closest thing to holiness for somebody to think about, this virgin bride. And so, even in Deuteronomy, there's even provisions in the law where if the husband is doubts his wife's virginity, then the wife has to bring proof of her virginity to the priests and the parents to show that no, to get a little biological, my hymen was broken. Yes. Here's the proof.
Yes.
And so virginity was something very protected, so much so that you have these daughters of Jerusalem that have protected their own virginity and her virginity. And then you have the watchmen or the brothers that have also been in charge of taking care of their sister and making sure that she and her virginity stay safe, because that was also a familial responsibility.
Well, maybe let me ask a different question. Why is her virginity important? It's like you introduce a main character and mention that she's a virgin, which would feel like a biological, or not biological, but like a biographical fact. And then you set up this whole the whole ancient Near Eastern culture was valuing it. Her brothers are guarding it. Why is virginity important? And why are you bringing it up now? Because you make it seem like it's an important part of the book.
It will be an important part of the book that we'll get to. And I guess I didn't look a ton into why there was such a high value on virginity. A few things come to mind. One was it's the beginning of the biblical story. So for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife. That's a singular event.
And the blessing of the world.
That's right.
Comes from the multiplication, the blessing that God promises comes from the loss of virginity. Yeah.
And then I think that there's also this high value on monogamy as a ethic and a virtue that kind of even the biblical narrative has to develop into and out of the death bringing ways of polygamy and what's the word, philandering and things like that. But also just in culture, and a lot of cultures hold this, that virginity was this symbol of purity, because you have this woman, this beautiful woman who has not been known, has not been defiled, as some people might put it. The Song of Songs will not put it that way. In fact, it will do something very different than that. But we have the words like deflowered, or the loss of innocence, or which again, the song will not talk about the loss of virginity in those ways. But there is this cultural way of viewing the loss of virginity as now you are no longer this eligible maiden.
Yeah.
So if you lose your virginity, and then you don't have a husband there to protect you, you're now kind of worthless in society, and you were unwanted.
So there's a social reality there
too,
where it's like if you lose your virginity, you are no longer eligible to be married again.
That's right, and then you're the subject of widowhood and
there's a
shame.
Cultural stigma around being unmarried.
That's right. Yeah, think about even closer to our time, like the Scarlet Letter and the scandal in the religious puritanical culture that Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote about. Yeah. It's very scandalous. Yeah. So even that, even the Puritans,
I guess, time. I think that makes sense. So you have a cultural time where virginity is prized, where it's like there's it's a loss of a social safety net in some ways.
Yep.
And what was most interesting to me is why is virginity important to the Bible? And you mentioned the loss of virginity makes way for the blessing of the world in the Garden of Eden. And so I guess I'm still well, why would a biblical author choose to make virginity something of a significant importance to like write a whole book about?
Yeah, it's really interesting to think about this because virginity in even cultures today, and I think it has been for a very long time, virginity is valuable, that it's prized. Like, why do we call them like the Virgin Islands or Virgin Lands or untouched territory? Or, I mean, you even just think of, this is dumb, but I even think about, like, I love technology. And it's like when I open up my new iPad and no one's ever touched it before and it's just new and unsoiled and it's just like,
no one has placed their fingerprint on this little
exactly. But even like this is this is extremely dark. But you think about in the sex trafficking world, what human women are the most valuable on the blackest markets of sex trafficking. It's virgins.
Yeah.
Why? I don't know. We can't quite put our finger on it or define it. Like, but there's something intrinsically priceless and valuable about virginity, especially a virgin woman. And I think all cultures have come to, I guess, except ours. But there's still lots of, in our culture, still a lot of prizing around protecting your daughter. Yeah. Like, I think fathers understand that, even if their daughters don't at times. But.
So in the biblical story then, so I understand, like, I think that I get that, a natural desire to protect something that has not, like, you know, like a forest, a virgin forest or an island, to protect something valuable. So what is virginity in the biblical story, and why does it begin to take such pride of place in this main character of the Song of Songs?
Right.
Because like you're setting me up to talk about.
I think that we might be circling a similar question of like, why would God use the metaphor of a branch for something or a vine for something? And I think it's that the image can only be pressed so far. And we could probably find a lot more to talk about here, but it's like there is just a sense of this pricelessness that this woman has cared for and nurtured, her garden, her virginity. And she calls her virginity, like her body, her garden.
Yeah.
And it's kept and walled off and kept very careful. She's got the daughters of Jerusalem. She's got the watchmen, her brothers. Everyone's protecting this garden. And now she's going to give that priceless thing over to someone else.
Okay, that's helpful. So what you're saying is there's no other parts of the biblical story I need to have in mind as I come into this book. All I really need to know is to understand Song of Solomon is the social and cultural value of virginity to this woman who is the main character.
Yeah, I think so. That might be, we might be overstating our point there.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
We don't need to be like, okay, what's the biblical theme of virginity that culminates here or develops strongly here? I think you're right. I think there's this cultural thing we need to understand, that this woman has prized and protected her virginity in a very, again, the question that set all this off was, what is a wise wedding night?
Yeah.
And so you've got this woman who has wisely protected her virginity, and she brings this extremely valuable, priceless thing to a husband.
So the wisdom is, who do I give something value?
I give something priceless to?
That's helpful.
And then the husband on the other side, he's got to be wise in order to handle that transfer.
Well,
I mean, because that is, how do you take something priceless away from someone and give them something equally valuable in return?
And then that person, if you do not do so, becomes a social pariah.
That's right.
And so like that woman becomes in a very vulnerable position if that man does not deal with his wife wisely.
Yes, we're getting there.
Okay.
Like this is, I'm getting goosebumps. This is hitting on what has struck me so fully about the song in this study this time is, especially as a man, that, and if I'm like, okay, Father Solomon's coming to me and be like, my son, here is how to think about sexuality and marriage. Your bride has given you her most priceless thing. And now you have to take that from her. You have to destroy it. You actually have to destroy the virginity, which is like, and that's how it's pictured in the book. We'll get there.
Yeah.
It's destroyed. But then on the back end, it's now my job as the husband to give her something priceless in return, which is my absolute gushing love and I adorn her. She was adorned with virginity. Now she's going on the other side. She's going to be adorned with my love, and I'm going to pour it on her and affirm her and comfort her. And now I'm her protector. Her virginity was her protector, and the daughters of Jerusalem and the watchmen. Now I'm her protector.
Yeah.
And it's my job to both make her beautiful, because her virginity made her beautiful in the past. Now it's my job to make her beautiful and to protect her garden while I've also taken something out of it.
Yeah. Even just like those fears are just basic to not just virginity, but just sex and marriage in general.
Yes.
When you decide to give your body to somebody else, it's this vulnerable thing that can be a place of like deep love or deep abuse
and deep fear
deep fear,
shame.
And so like those constellation of emotions is like what's happening, and
that is what's happening.
Okay.
Like we are there. We've gotten there. And so a wise wedding night, maybe I can put it this way, a wise wedding night is where virginity is transferred into marriage. Like virginity is transferred into sex, and there's no shame, and there's no loss of beauty, and there's no loss in pricelessness. But that transfer is made, and it's from glory to glory. Like that's what a wise wedding night should look like.
How can a man and a woman destroy something together and like build something more beautiful on the other side?
Yes.
Okay, and that's fascinating, because that really is, as we already said, like that is the story of Adam and Eve in the garden.
Yes.
They, in their virginity, they destroy something together and then begin populating the world, tending and keeping the garden. That is what humanity is meant to do.
Yes, and when it doesn't, what happens?
Yeah.
Like let's go ahead and paint this quick picture. What happens when you don't act wisely in this relationship? You seize the fruit before you're supposed to. Instead of bringing life and flourishing in your relationship and in the world, you bring death and destruction.
And shame.
So you had naked people who were there together, felt no shame. They reach for a wisdom that's not theirs, and they seek to live in a way that's different from what God intended, and they seek to define good and evil for themselves. And all of a sudden, now there's shame in their nakedness. There is a breaking in the ordering of their desires. God says, Eve, your desire will be for your husband, and he will rule over you. And then there's a breaking in the world, thorns and brambles. And so the world breaks whenever we try to take wisdom into our own hands before God gives it to us.
And very specifically for the poem, like what we do with our bodies really like determines the fate of the world.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yep.
It's like, especially in marriage, like it's like it determines the fate of the world.
Yeah.
And that's why the marriage night is a subject of wise reflection, not just a fun thing that happens after you get married.
Yes, for the man.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, right. Yeah, totally. What we do with our bodies does affect the fate of the whole world. And that might seem like an oversimplification or an exaggeration, but you're right. Like you go back to the beginning of the story of the Bible and the fate of the world, of would the world experience the image of God in humanity, was tied up in Adam and Eve having sex without shame and multiplying,
creating
a family throughout the world. And that would act and carrying God's wisdom in that way throughout the world. But when that relationship broke, so did the world. And so it is interesting that now how is God healing the world? It is through embodied humans, right? Like acting in the wise way that God would have us act in the world. And that can be any kind of morality, any kind of action, but specifically in virginity and marriage are the two categories that we have. Like how people protect and prize their virginity and how people wisely enter into monogamous heterosexual marriage, both affect what happens in the world. Like, and there's a wisdom that goes out from that.
Yeah.
Or there's more breaking that goes out from that.
Yeah. I'm also thinking of all the ways that if that's like the basic structure of Genesis and the human race, like what we do with our bodies ends up like affecting the world, especially as it relates to our wives and the act of sex. It also makes me think a little bit more deeply about why Jesus would call himself the groom and he would call his church his bride, and then later that the church is his body as well. So it makes me think it's like, if it makes sense then, if one of the most basic structures of flourishing in the world is the vulnerable giving up of virginity for the creation of family, that you would have repeated in Jesus's life and death, the giving up of life for the sake of a family.
Yeah, he creates a family.
He creates a family who is called also his body and is meant to, through the actions of that body, bring blessing and thriving to the world. Like that's the story of Jesus as well. Yeah. So it makes sense to me then that metaphor is used, because I think sometimes it's weird. Like, I'm a part of a bride. Right. Like it feels like a strange, mystical, almost like label for the church in Jesus. Yep. But like, this is helping me oh no, this is the story of the whole Bible.
That's right. Through my union with Jesus, like him and me and I and him, our communion, he is birthing a family that is blessing the world. Like, through Jesus indwelling his church through his spirit, he is creating a family in the world. And what had to happen for that to occur was the giving over of this priceless, valuable thing, the life of Jesus, right? And yet, how could that transfer happen and still be good? Well, because he rose from the dead and is now seated on the highest throne and indwells his people. Yeah. And then for us to enter into that relationship with him, we have to do the same thing.
We die.
We give up this priceless thing, our very lives, and we hand it over to Jesus, and we're like, how can me giving you my very life and dying on a cross with you, how can that bring flourishing? Well, it's because he's the good husband, and he's the one who can do that transfer, and nothing is lost in the process. Instead, everything is gained.
Man, well, that's awesome.
We haven't even gotten into the song yet. We're just talking about the categories. But so let's stop here. Yes. And next episode, we'll go into the structure of the song. We'll look at some of the language in the song, and we'll dig deep into the woman's experience of losing her virginity, how the man transfers that for her, and what we can learn from the getting into the text of the song.
That's awesome.
Thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Spoken Gospel Podcast. Spoken Gospel creates short films, devotionals, and podcasts like this one. Everything we make is free because of generous supporters like you. To see our resources, visit spokengospel.com or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks for listening. See you next time.